Okay, we are live with tonight's Bible study, flying solo tonight. So we're going to go straight into the lesson. We'll have a brief little discussion, just me and the camera tonight. There's a lot going on with Iran and Israel, that sort of thing. Hamas is involved as well. We'll keep an eye on that, and we'll talk more about that on the other side. We're going to go ahead and get straight into the video.
As there's coming a one world religion. The scriptures actually say, the Bible prophesies there's coming a one world religion. The scriptures actually say that in the end time there will be a one world government, a one world religion, and a one world economic system. Today we're talking about the one world religion. In his book Perestroika, Mikhail Gorbachev said that there are three root causes for war: political conflicts, religious conflicts, and economic conflicts. His offered solution was a one world government, a global religious system, and a global economy. He is proposing exactly what the Bible prophesies is going to happen. So let's take a look today at the one world religion. We've already talked in previous lessons about the one world government. We talked about the one world economic system called the mark of the beast. Today we're going to look at the coming one world religion. It's Revelation chapter 13, verse 15. Now, by now you may know that the entire 13th chapter of Revelation is devoted to end time issues. Verses 1 through 8 is devoted to the one world government. Verses 11 through 14 are devoted to the one world religious system and the ruler of that one world religious system, the false prophet. Verse 16 through 18 deals with the one world economic system, the mark of the beast. So let's look at Revelation 13, verse 15. And he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, the Antichrist, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. So you can see in the end time New World Order, there's going to be an element of worship. We don't know exactly what form it will take. It may simply be interfaithism. Your religion's as valid as my religion. I respect yours. You respect mine. The end goal is to remove religious conflict so supposedly we can have peace on earth, goodwill toward men. Now, part of what we're going to talk about today will contain the most amazing story never told. How Mikhail Gorbachev and Pope John Paul II secretly planned the fall of the Berlin Wall and the birth of the New World Order. This is going to absolutely amaze you. Now, before we get into the meat of that, however, we need to find out where this powerful organization, the Roman Catholic Church, actually stands. There are many quotes from the last several popes that will give us a good insight as to the role Roman Catholicism is playing in the establishment of the prophesied one world government. It's really interesting when we take a look at what the popes actually say, because the Roman Catholic Church represents 1 billion people, and many people believe they even speak for the other 1.1 billion Protestants. So if you put Protestants and Catholics together, you have 1/3 of the world's population. So what the Roman Catholic Church promotes and what they stand for is very, very important. So let's take quotes from the last 5 popes to see what they said in their own words about world government. Pope Pius XII was the Pope of the Church during World War II and was also the Pope at the time of the formation of the United Nations. This quote comes from the publication Vital Speeches of the Day, published on December the 15th of 1959. The article was Legacy to World Federalism, or World Government. World Federalism is another way of saying world government. Pius urged work for peace on 3 levels: the reaffirmation of the necessity of a supranational world order. That means a world order going across national boundaries. 2, accepting the United Nations, but with ceaseless efforts to strengthen it. Number 3, promote the fullest cooperation with every agency that promotes international friendship. Continuing in the article, Legacy to World Federalism, Pius was an unabashed internationalist. When you hear that a political leader or a spiritual leader is an internationalist, that means he's a believer in one world government. Pius desired and sought and prayed for a future world political organization true to the spirit of federalism. This is a direct quote from Pius XII. Catholics, above all, must realize that they are called to overcome every vestige of nationalistic narrowness. Notice the phraseology here, nationalistic narrowness. Now that's bad, right? If you're a narrow-minded, bigoted person, that's the implication here. So if you still believe in nationalism as opposed to world government, Pius was calling on all of us to overcome every vestige of nationalistic narrowness. He goes on to say, Catholics have the obligation of insisting on the ratification of the Genocide Pact. Now, what is the Genocide Pact? You should know that the United States of America has now signed on to the Genocide Treaty. The Genocide Treaty came to us from the United Nations and was resisted for many years by the U.S. government. But on November the 11th of 1988, President Reagan signed on to the Genocide Treaty, and then the Senate ratified it on December the 9th of the same year. So what's so big about genocide? Why would Pope Pius insist on the obligation on the part of Catholics to support the Genocide Treaty? You've got to know what genocide is. Now, most of us say, oh, I know what it is. It's when you try to eliminate a religion, a race, a particular sexual orientation. And so a person shouldn't be going around killing people. So I would be for that. But stop a minute. If you go to the Britannica Encyclopedia and look under genocide, it gives an interesting definition. And this same definition is in the actual Genocide Treaty. It says, to cause physical harm, watch close, or mental harm to a minority. Now, wait a minute. Are you saying that it would become a crime to cause mental harm to a minority? How do you cause mental harm? Maybe by speaking against it, maybe by writing against it. Let me give you an example. We're all dealing with right now with the gay agenda. And recently, the United States government, actually in 2009, I believe it was, they passed the hate crime bill. That set aside homosexuals as a protected group of people. So if you speak against homosexuality, you could be charged with genocide because of causing them mental harm. Now, in case you think I'm stretching things, move up to Canada, just north of our border, and you'll see up there that you can actually be put in prison for 5 years for speaking against homosexuality. About a year or two ago, there was a minister in Europe that was put in prison. He was arrested because he preached a sermon from his pulpit, from the Bible, against homosexuality. Now, realizing that this was a potential problem in the hate crime bill passed in the U.S., they specifically exempted people who objected to homosexuality for religious reasons, but they didn't give that objection or that exemption to the average person out there. So when we talk about genocide, we're talking about controlling what you say, controlling what you believe, controlling what you think. Where does freedom of speech come in all this? Well, you've got to let go of a little bit of freedom of speech because genocide's a bad thing. Now, Mikhail Gorbachev In his book, Perestroika, on page 231, he was outlining there what needs to happen to produce global security. He actually sent a copy of this to all of the heads of state at the time. And he said, we must extirpate all genocide, apartheid, and religious exclusiveness. Interesting. First of all, extirpate. Interesting word. It means kill off. We must kill off all genocide. That means causing mental harm, apartheid, and religious exclusiveness. Another interesting phrase that we don't talk about much. But Gorbachev puts it in the same category with genocide. So what does religious exclusiveness mean? That means if you say your religion is right and all other religions are wrong. For example, Jesus said, except you believe that I am the Messiah, you will die in your sins. So Jesus would be considered religiously exclusive. The Bible also tells us about Jesus, neither is there salvation in any other. For there's none other name under heaven given among men whereby we must be saved. That's the reason we're seeing war being waged right now around the world on using the name of Jesus. They don't mind if you pray in the name of God. They're not going to stamp out all religion, but they don't want you to use the name. Our military now has forbade our chaplains from praying in the name of Jesus. If you're called into a public setting to pray, they expect you to avoid the name of Jesus. Why? Because they all know that Christianity is an exclusive religion. So if you're a Christian and you follow the teachings of Jesus Christ, then you would be guilty of religious exclusiveness. Now, Gorbachev said, we've got to stamp that out, and he's putting that in the same category with genocide. Is there a chance that someday you or I could be put on trial for religious exclusiveness? Gorbachev says it's got to be extirpated. And yes, the answer is you could be charged under the Genocide Pact for creating mental harm for a person. Okay, now let's talk about outlawing religious exclusiveness. Is it really happening? On June the 28th of 2000 in France, there was a Washington Times article that told about this. There was a French proposal targeting proselytizing. They were proposing up to 2 years in prison for exercising excessive pressure in an attempt to proselytize an individual. Now, answer me, what's excessive pressure? So if you invite a person to your church once, is that allowable? What if you would invite them more than once, twice, or 3 times? I asked a person that was involved with all of this thinking, and they said, yeah, if you ask them once and they don't want to go, if you ask them again, that would become excessive pressure. Now, they're talking about a law in France of up to 2 years in prison for this nebulous crime of using excessive pressure in an attempt to convert them to your religion. More and more nations around the globe are passing anti-proselytizing laws. Most Muslim nations have had anti-proselytizing laws for a long time. So the question is this: is religious exclusiveness a hate crime? We need to know that. Okay, now let's get back to our quotes about one world government from our popes. We've already taken a look at Pope Pius XII. He left office in 1958, and Pope John XXIII took office. He became known as the beloved Pope. Everyone seemed to like him. Well, he published an encyclical. It came out in Look magazine, July the 2nd of 1963. The encyclical was Pacem in Terris, which stands for peace in the land or peace on earth. Along with its plea to the United Nations to become more equal to the magnitude and nobility of its task, the Pope's encyclical made a case for the establishment of world government with all the cogency of his theologians' best proofs that God exists. Now, these are not my words. I'm reading now from Look magazine. In Vatican language, Pacem in Terris, or peace in the land, calls world government a public authority, but defines it as having worldwide power and endowed with the proper means for the efficacious pursuit of the universal common good. The Pope held that such a government must be founded because all nations are now interdependent. A clarion call from Pope John XXIII way back in 1958 through 1963 for a one world governmental system. Now remember what we're doing today. We're taking time to prove that all popes in modern times have been believers and promoters of the establishment of one world government. Whether you think that's a good thing or a bad thing, I simply want you to understand where this powerful organization, the Roman Catholic Church, stands. Before we're finished, we will show from Scripture that there will be a union between politics and religion in the formation of this prophesied world governmental system. And you're going to see that it's much further advanced than many of us think that it is. Our next pope is Pope Paul VI. His encyclical was called Populorum Progressio. It was published March the 26th of 1967. Here's what he had to say. Who can fail to see the need and importance of thus gradually coming to the establishment of a world authority capable of taking effective action on the jurisdictional and political planes? Delegates to international organizations, public officials, gentlemen of the press, teachers and educators, all of you must realize that you have your part to play in the construction of a new world order. Pope Paul VI. He left office in 1978. His successor, Pope John Paul I, only lived 33 days in office, and then he was assassinated. So we have no word from him, and we'll have more to say about his assassination at a later time. Okay, now we come to Pope John Paul II, one of the most popular popes in modern times. He called for a new world order just like all the rest. This came from the Vatican City Press, January the 2nd of 2004, and it was published by CNN. Pope John Paul II rang in the new year on Thursday with a renewed call for peace in the Middle East and Africa and the creation of a new world order, a popular term, based on respect for the dignity of man and equality among nations. This year, John Paul directed his thoughts to continuing conflicts around the globe, but he stressed that to bring about peace, there needs to be a new respect for international law and the creation of a new international order based on the goals of the United Nations. Notice it always goes back to the United Nations because the popes have been huge promoters of the United Nations even before it was formed. Well, Pope John Paul II died a few years ago, and the present Pope, Pope Benedict XVI, took office. He published an encyclical in 2009. An encyclical is a position paper presenting important subjects in the mind of the Pope to the world. Now, this encyclical was called Caritas in Veritate, which means charity in truth. It says, in the face of the unrelenting growth of global interdependence, there is a strong felt need, even in the midst of a global recession, for a reform of the United Nations organization. Now, this present Pope, Pope Benedict XVI, he loves the United Nations, but he wants to reform it. He goes on to say, and likewise, of economic institutions and international finance. so that the concept of the family of nations can acquire real teeth. The concept of the world community or the international community or the family of nations, so that that concept can acquire real teeth. Notice the term, real teeth. What are teeth for? Well, teeth are for biting. Teeth are for enforcement. And Pope Benedict XVI, the present Pope, is saying we have to reform the United Nations and give it real teeth in order to enforce its will upon the world. In the encyclical, Pope Benedict went on to say, to manage the global economy, to revive economies by the crisis that are hit by the crisis, to avoid any deterioration of the present crisis and the greater imbalance that would result, to bring about the integral and timely disarmament, food security and peace, to guarantee the protection of the environment, and to regulate migration. For all this, there is an urgent need of a true world political authority. Now, that's a lot of material there. So, to manage the global economy, that's number one that he thinks there has to be a world government for. He goes on to say, disarmament, it's one of the biggest messages of the United Nations. They want to disarm the world so that there's no arms to kill anybody with, so you can't have war anymore. Now, they do want the United Nations to still have an army. And nobody seems to ask, well, what would happen if all of the arms were gone and the United Nations only had the arms? What if Adolf Hitler gained control of the world governmental system and the only army left? We've now destroyed the checks and balances that could overthrow such a scenario. Well, they say that won't happen. However, the Bible says that's exactly what's going to happen. So disarmament, food security, that sounds like the mark of the beast, where everyone has a number without which they cannot buy or sell. The protection of the environment, big environmental conferences going on. We have to have a global treaty that will be binding, that will enforce the world against global warming. The regulation of migration, another huge problem we got, the immigration problem. He's saying here that this world government authority, the United Nations, is the answer. There is urgent need for a true world political authority. And a true world political authority simply means a one world government. Now, Pierre Boylan, the Bishop of Verdun, France, probably summed it up the best and the most candid. This comes from the book, The Council and the Future by Mario von Galli. On October the 8th of 1965, Mr. Boylan said, therefore, we must emphasize the great moral responsibility to empower an international authority to prevent war. We're going to have peace through this thing. The entire world must become aware that if this institution, the United Nations, is to become effective, every nation must renounce its ultimate sovereignty to this universal authority. You like the sound of that? All nations get rid of their sovereignty. We now have a one world government. He goes on to say, this is an obligation. If nations, if rulers of nations, if public opinion will not accept this renunciation, then they really are voting for peace, however beautiful may be their speeches. They're voting for war, however beautiful may be their speeches concerning peace. So we've gone over all of these quotes, Pope after Pope, Pope Pius the 12th, Pope John 23rd, Pope Paul the 6th, John Paul the 2nd, and now our present Pope, Benedict the 16th, plus the Bishop of Verdun, France, Pierre Boylan. They're all singing the same song. We must have a world government, and we must have it right now. Now, where is this going to lead? The Bible says a world government is coming, but the Bible also says there will be a world religion cooperating with this world government. We can see the largest religion on earth, Christianity, being represented here by the Pope. He's considered the head of Christianity, and he is avidly advocating one world government. We will learn about the secret relationship between Mikhail Gorbachev and Pope John Paul II. We will see how they worked together to bring down the Berlin Wall and usher in the New World Order. It's one of the most amazing stories never told. Now remember, when we say New World Order, it's just another name for the world government prophesied in the Bible for the end time. Let's go back now to 1917. It was in 1917 that the Bolshevik Revolution took over the Soviet Union. The Bolshevik Revolution continued in the Soviet Union up until World War II. In 1942, communism only ruled one country, the Soviet Union, which means approximately 6% of the world's population. However, by 1962, communism ruled 50% of the world's population. Now think about this. 6% 1942, 50% 1962. It was an amazing revolution sweeping our world. Now, how did it happen? Well, what happened was, at the end of World War II, at Yalta, the Soviet Union was given control over all of Eastern Europe. They took control of Poland, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, Romania, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, and of course, East Germany. Now, in addition to that, in 1949, the communists swept through China, taking over the most populous nation on the face of the earth. So from 42, 6% to 1962, half of the world's population was now under the iron heel of international communism. It appeared that communism was taking over the entire world. Even Henry Kissinger stated that the days of capitalism were possibly over. Pope John XXIII, seeing the huge red wave sweeping the world, had a decision to make. Does the church fight against this communist advance, or is it too powerful? Should we move to make an alliance with communism? Now, the church was really more friendly toward a socialist type of an economy than they were toward total free enterprise. They called it social justice, and they felt like there were times for legitimate wealth redistribution. Consequently, in 1961, Pope John XXIII appointed Mr. Agostino Casaroli to begin building bridges with the communist world. Well, let's wind ahead now to 1978. I was traveling through the city of Chicago and tuned in to WBBM radio. There was a talk program in progress, and they were interviewing a man by the name of Malachi Martin. He had just written a book called The Final Conclave. Well, they had my attention. I knew that a conclave was the election of a pope. I knew that final conclave meant the final election of a pope. What was this man saying, and who was he? Well, I kept listening and found out that Malachi Martin was a Jesuit priest, and he was a Catholic priest till the day he died. Furthermore, he was the ultimate insider. He actually had taught at Vatican College in Rome for 6 years, and furthermore, he was an intimate friend with Pope John the 23rd. Well, I was interested in what this man had to say. Now, as he continued his story, what he said was that there was a tremendous struggle taking place inside the Roman Catholic Church. They were believing that the next pope should be a communist. However, Martin believed if the next pope were a communist, if communism captured the church, that they would then gain control over the entire world and would then turn and destroy the church. Well, I was so interested in what he was saying because the prophecies of the Bible say that this is what's yet going to happen in the future. The Bible talks about a world government gaining control of the world with an alliance with religion, and that after they use their alliance with the religion to gain control, that the political powers will then turn and destroy the religious element. So what Malachi Martin was saying on the radio on this talk program that day was exactly what I knew was in the Bible. Obviously, I was pretty interested with what he had to say. As a matter of fact, I went out the same day and bought the book. It's called The Final Conclave. Now, Martin went on to say in the interview that Pope Paul VI was terminally ill at the time. This was 1978. And there was a tremendous jostling for position for choosing the next pope and gaining control of the powerful entity that we know of as the Roman Catholic Church. Well, later on in 78, Pope Paul VI did in fact die. The conclave was called and a new pope was elected. Pope John Paul I was the name that he took to rule under. And after being elected, he only ruled for a very short 33 days. And then he died unexpectedly. Well, I was watching this whole process trying to determine whether Malachi Martin's pope was elected that would purge the church of corruption and return the church to its spiritual mission, or whether the pope that would be a pro-communist pope was elected. I couldn't figure it out. Of course, it was only a short 33 days. While I was still trying to figure all this out, the Pope died. Now, what was so amazing was this Pope was said to be in wonderful health. He was only 65 years of age, never had a day's heart trouble in his life, and yet they said he died of a heart attack unexpectedly during the night. I didn't know what to make of it all. While I'm still studying, reading articles, trying to figure it all out, a book appeared on the shelves called In God's Name by David Yallop. And then on the heels of that, another book appeared, Pontiff, by Gordon Thomas and Max Morgan Witt. Well, then a book appeared by Malachi Martin himself. The book was called Vatican. In all of these books, they claimed that the Pope, in fact, was assassinated. And they gave very, very compelling proof. In the book Vatican, Malachi Martin said he was assassinated, and then Martin appeared on our program, our radio program, Politics and Religion. I asked him point blank, Mr. Martin, was Pope John Paul I assassinated? He said, there's no doubt to those of us who are inside the workings of the Roman Catholic Church that the Pope was indeed assassinated. Okay, so apparently Pope John Paul I was the Pope that Martin favored, who he thought would purge the church of its corruption. But there were apparently forces inside the church that were determined. They were this close to gaining control of the church, and they were not going to allow Pope John Paul I to mess it up. Now, in case you have any doubts in your mind, let me tell you what happened the day that Pope John Paul I died. There was a man in charge of Vatican Bank. His name was Paul Marcinkus. He was accused of widespread corruption, so much so that the Italian government had issued an order for his arrest. Imagine arresting the Vatican's banker. He avoided arrest by staying inside the walls of the Vatican. You probably know the Vatican is a sovereign state of its own, so the Italian government was not allowed to come there to execute this warrant for the arrest, so he avoided arrest. Well, Pope John Paul I ordered the removal of Paul Marcinkus from his control of many billions of dollars per year as head of the Vatican Bank. That same day, he ordered the disciplining of the powerful Archbishop of Chicago, Cardinal Cody. Now, it had come out 2 or 3 years prior to this that Cody had funneled $1.3 million of church money to a woman in Florida. When this became public, he said that she was a distant cousin that needed help. However, after a little bit of investigative journalism, it was revealed that in fact, she was a friend of Cardinal Cody's. Well, knowing this, Pope John Paul I ordered the removal of Marcinkus that day and the disciplining of Cardinal Cody. But neither order was ever carried out. Instead, the Pope died that very night. So now it's time for another Pope. The prelates all return to Rome. They go there to the Sistine Chapel, and when the white smoke comes out of the chimney of the Sistine Chapel, the signal that we have a Pope, the announcement was made. Karol Wojtyla of Poland. And everyone said, "Who is that?" He took the name to rule under Pope John Paul II. Now, this pope was the youngest pope elected in 154 years. He was the first non-Italian pope in 455 years. This was a revolutionary choice because normally the popes came from Italy, since the church is called the Roman Catholic Church. But he became the first non-Italian in 455 years. But this is the real important issue. He was the first pope ever from a communist country, ever in the history of the Roman Catholic Church. And his number one claim to fame was that he had presided over the church in Poland for 45 years under communism. And the church had not only survived, but it had actually thrived under this arrangement, this alliance between Catholicism and communism. Okay, now, while the votes were being counted in conclave to determine who won to be the new pope, guess what Mr. Wojtyla read to pass the time? The World Marxist Review, the official publication of international communism. Amazing. Then, in the first year of his rule, he went to the United Nations to deliver a speech there. During his speech, he called for massive wealth redistribution, which simply happens to be the number one plank in the platform for international communism. It certainly appeared that the communists had at least a pope who could work with them, if not an actual communist pope. Well, on page 560 of his book, Vatican, it's interesting some of the things that Malachi Martin had to say about the new pope. Martin claimed that the pope told his close associates, "I plan to make Poland a model. We will show them, the Soviets, how to make socialism work." Socialism was not working for Soviet Russia because people got paid whether they worked or not. There was no motive to work. So the economy of the Soviet bloc was going down, down, down. Well, this pope says we can show them how to make it work. Now, all this was being said in 1979. The pope said, "I plan to deal with the Soviets, not by announcing that we will bury them, but by showing them how to solve the problem that they themselves know will bury them. I plan to give them a model where religion, morality, and sociocultural life are totally detached and independent from political control." And one of the Pope's aides asked, And that model is to be Poland? The Pope nodded. But more than a model for the Soviets, we will also have produced a model for all of Europe. Now, think about all this. Remember that Pope John XXIII had made Agostino Casaroli special envoy to the communists way back in 1961. What does Pope John Paul II do for Mr. Agostino Casaroli? He now appoints him in 1979 to be the Vatican Secretary of State. He puts this man, whose specialty is building an alliance between communism and Catholicism, he now puts him in control of the foreign policy of the Roman Catholic Church. Interesting choice. Well, that was 79. 1980. A labor union was formed in Poland called Solidarity. It was led by Mr. Lech Walesa. He was a labor leader and also a very devout Roman Catholic individual. Well, when this Solidarity was formed, interesting things happened. First of all, the communists feared it. What is this Pope up to? They knew the Pope was behind all this. And so the communists banned Solidarity in Poland, and they placed Lech Walesa under house arrest for the next 2 years. However, it was about this time that a new, young, vibrant leader was rising inside the Soviet Union. His name was Mikhail Gorbachev. And during the early 80s, he was ascending to power, gaining more and more influence. Finally, in 1985, he was elected as president of the Soviet Politburo, and he became the leader of the Soviet Union. Well, between 1985 and 1989, things were changing in the Soviet Union and around the world. Mikhail Gorbachev was continually talking about allowing liberty, allowing religious freedom, and nobody knew whether to believe him or not. This was a really different type of Soviet leader than we had ever seen before. Well, finally in 1989, now don't forget, Agostino Casaroli, he's working behind the scenes, now Secretary of State of the Vatican, still building bridges to the communist world. In 1989, the Solidarity political party in Poland was legalized and allowed to run for office. Solidarity overwhelmingly won the election in Poland. Now, before this happened, when there were efforts at reform in other communist states under Soviet influence, the Soviet tanks had moved in and crushed it. I'm talking about Hungary, 1956. I'm talking about Czechoslovakia, 1968. The tanks had rolled and crushed the reform movements. So everyone held their breath when Solidarity won the election and they were moving to take over Poland. Would the tanks roll again? Well, they didn't. When the Soviets did not invade Poland, very quickly, revolution began to sweep through the other Soviet satellite countries, and one country after another threw off their Marxist regimes and brought in a more liberal government. It was called the Velvet Revolution. Several months during 1989 were amazing to observe. Finally, as this Velvet Revolution swept through Eastern Europe, Mikhail Gorbachev paid a visit to the center of everything, to the Iron Curtain, to the Berlin Wall. He went to East. Velvet Revolution culminated in the fall of the Berlin Wall on November the 9th, 1989. And I remember thinking, what is Gorbachev thinking about all this? But then I saw the video of him applauding as the wall came crashing down. So he was complicit in this entire plan. Interesting. Well, a mere 20 days after the fall of the Berlin Wall, Mikhail Gorbachev President George Bush Sr. and Pope John Paul II had meetings together. They came out of those meetings announcing the birth of the New World Order. USA Today, on November the 30th of 1989, we're talking about 21 days after the fall of the Berlin Wall, on their front page had a picture of Pope John Paul II meeting with Mikhail Gorbachev. This was the first time ever that a leader of the communist world had met at the Vatican with the Pope. Now, it was interesting that the USA Today said on their front page article, the Pope has been an advisor to Solidarity since its inception in 1980. Lech Walesa's priest, Henry Jankowski, was never far from the Solidarity leader's side. Now, the Soviets knew this. They knew that the Pope's hand was working with Walesa through Henry Jankowski, his priest. It went on in the article to show a picture of the Pope and Gorbachev together. And during the introductions, when Gorbachev was introduced to the Pope, would you like to know who was given the honor of the introductions? You probably guessed by now. Mr. Agostino Casaroli. Here we are, 1961, given the job of building bridges between Catholicism and communism. And now here he stands, proudly introducing Pope John Paul II to Mikhail Gorbachev. Mission accomplished. Fall of the Berlin Wall was, in fact, the birth of the New World Order. This statement came from Time magazine, December the 11th of 1989. When the vicar of the former evil empire met the vicar of Christ in the Vatican last week, what he said concerning religion would have been ideological heresy to Lenin and all the other Soviet leaders who followed him. Mikhail Gorbachev told Pope John Paul II, "We have changed our attitude on some matters, such as religion. Now, we not only proceed from the assumption that no one should interfere in matters of the individual's conscience, we also say that the moral values that religion generated and embodied for centuries can help in the work of renewal in our country, too." The Pope said he would teach the communists that. It looks like he's been successful. Now, he goes on to say, it appears that Gorbachev, whether for pragmatic or other reasons, has become a believer in religion's capacity for motivating the Soviet people to pull their country out of its economic doldrums. Now, this is exactly what the Pope said he would do on page 560 of the book Vatican. He said this back in 1979. Here we are 10 years later. The alliance has been finished between Catholicism and communism in their effort to build the New World Order.
You also have Tomahawk cruise missiles aboard those guided missile destroyers in the Truman strike.
All right.
Hear about any Tomahawk strikes
welcome back.
So certainly, there's more firepower.
Really good lesson. This is one that I feel like every year I need to brush up on.
Not only to the Houthis, but
Becoming one world religion.
Iran as well.
The Catholic Church will play a tremendous role in pushing the one world religion. We're going to change off to another gear right now. I want to kind of focus on what's going on in the Middle East. There is breaking news earlier today. I don't want to blow this out of proportion, but I do want to bring it to your attention.
For such an operation, President Trump has said he wants to end this diplomatically. That's why he sent that letter, but it was rejected from the Ayatollah. Iranians support these Houthi rebels, and so there's no question this is a message being sent to Tehran.
President Trump has just recently announced a few hours
Lucas
ago
Tomlinson at the White House. If you get more
we
information
have
on these attacks against the
waged
Houthis
war
in Yemen.
on
Get back to us. Thanks, Lucas.
the Houthi rebels in Yemen. He also put on there that we're doing some airstrikes over there. They have been pinching off a lot of the waterways through the Suez Canal, that sort of thing. It's been a long time since ships have been able to go through there. I'm trying to see what Trump said about how long that's been. It's been some time. It's been over a year since a U.S. flag commercial ship safely sailed through the Suez Canal, the Red Sea, or the Gulf of Aden. The last American warship to go through the Red Sea 4 months ago was attacked by the Houthis over a dozen times. These relentless assaults have cost the U.S. and world economy many billions of dollars, while at the same time putting innocent lives at risk. And this is something else that he puts in his statement. He says, to all Houthi terrorists, your time is up, and your attacks must stop, starting today. If they don't, hell will rain down upon you like nothing you have ever seen before. So all of this, if you're familiar with the Houthis, they are backed by Iran, obviously. They're kind of a proxy of Iran to go and do a lot of their bidding and stir up trouble and soften up targets so that Iran can do what they want to do and just kind of keep people in line that may get out of line, other nation states in that region. The Houthi rebels have been it's just a tough thing to deal with because they seem to be so tough to pinpoint. I'm guessing at that. That must be the reason. It must be a tough thing to pinpoint. Well, Trump has said that's enough. Well, what's the point to all that? We always watch anytime there is a big escalation in things up and down the Euphrates River. And I know the Suez Canal is not necessarily that, but this has to do with directly with Iran. So we're going to wait and see just this entire situation with Israel and Hamas and Israel and Iran, U.S. and Iran. We are now trying to force them back to the negotiation tables for nuclear talks. And it's believed by a lot of people in the circles of the U.S. government, the current circles in U.S. government, that Iran may actually possess one or two nuclear weapons. So, excuse me, had a bit of a cold today. So, just something to be aware of on the Euphrates River area, Iran being a part of that. We're going to keep an eye on that. They're supposed to be releasing a hostage today, or I believe they already have, in accordance with Israel, Hamas, and the United States, that whole deal. But keep in mind, if things do escalate a little bit further concerning Iran or that situation in the Middle East, that sixth trumpet war that I'm always focusing on, and you'll find that in Revelation 9, starting in verse 13. And it describes that the army of the horsemen was 200,000, which is 200 million. China is probably the only one relevant that could field an army of 200 million soldiers. And right now, if Iran were to get themselves in a pickle, Russia's pretty tied up with, not only is Russia tied up with, and this is just now kind of coming to me, not only is Russia kind of tied up with the Ukraine thing, but on top of that, a little bit more now, Trump and Putin are trying to establish a newfound relationship, if you will, on the world stage as far as how these two nations are going to get along with each other, which I think really leaves the backing of Iran up to China. And I believe if Iran feels that China is going to back them up, that they can puff their chest a little bit further, because China is a much bigger military than Russia has. So that's going to be an interesting thing to see. I'm not in any hurry for it, but there is a war coming up. The next trumpet to sound will be the Sixth Trumpet War, and that's why we always keep an eye on things along the Euphrates River. And just remember, as a refresher, down the Euphrates River, that's mentioned in Revelation 9:13. You've got Syria, Turkey, Iraq, and Iran. So those four nations house the Euphrates River. So we're always keeping an eye on things in those areas. So this directly affects, we're basically directly attacking Iran at this point. Iran is also heavily involved in the situation with Israel and Hamas as well. That's another proxy of theirs. So just something to keep an eye open. We do it every day here at Prophecy Views, so you can always tune in here every week to see what the latest is when we do our Bible studies. So we're going to keep an eye on that, and we will get back with you next week, 6:15, same time, same channel, same page. Give us a follow, if you would, on Facebook under Prophecy Views. If you want to catch a little more insight or start an inside discussion, check out our Prophecy Views Connected page. It's not directly ours, but we are involved in it, I guess, to some extent, or we kind of keep an eye on what's going on with it. So Prophecy Views is the place to go. If you want to catch the live feed, you can always catch us later on that same page, or YouTube if they don't take us down, or I would highly recommend you follow us or like us on Rumble, and that's under Prophecy Views as well. God bless everybody. Good night. We will see you next Saturday at 6:15 p.m.